slums of Medellin, Colombia, an 11-year-old girl kidnapped a boy from a wealthy family and demanded a ransom. The family refused to pay, so she shot him dead. She was 11 years old, and by the time her story ended, 6 decades later, she would be blamed for more than 200 murders, and the deadliest men in the criminal world would be afraid to say her name. But if you think she was the exception, you are about to meet 11 more. These are the most ruthless women of the outlaw world. Pearl Hart. On May 30th, 1899, a stagecoach running between Globe and Florence, Arizona was stopped by 2 armed robbers at a watering point in Cane Springs Canyon. So far, nothing unusual. Stagecoach robberies had been happening in the West for half a century. But this one was different, and it was different in ways nobody on that coach understood yet. The first strange thing was the robbery itself. One bandit held a Colt .45 on the passengers, while the other, a small figure in men's clothes, collected $431 and 2 guns. And then the small one did something no road agent in the history of the West had ever done. She handed each passenger $1 back, so they would have money to eat when they reached town. A robber giving refunds. Then one of the victims noticed something else. The hands holding the gun were long, white, and slender, and they did not match the rough clothes at all. The bandit was a woman. And that raised the question everyone in America would soon be asking. Who was she? The answer only made the story stranger. She was not some hardened frontier outlaw. Pearl Hart had been born into a respectable family in Ontario, Canada, and educated in a boarding school. At 16, she ran off with a gambler who drank and beat her, and by 1899 she was broke in an Arizona mining town when a letter arrived that changed everything. Her mother was dying, and Pearl had no money to reach her, so she cut her hair, put on her partner Joe Boot's clothes, and rode out to rob one of the last stagecoaches still running in America. The robbery worked. The getaway did not. The two wandered the desert for days until a posse found them asleep on the ground. And while Boot surrendered quietly, Pearl fought the men trying to take her. That should have been the end of the story. It was actually the beginning, because what happened next made no sense at all. Instead of disappearing into a cell, Pearl Hart became a national sensation. The press went into a frenzy over the lady bandit. Cosmopolitan magazine ran her life story, and crowds gathered outside the Tucson jail just to see her, one admirer even handing her a bobcat cub as a gift. And then she escaped, breaking out through a hole in the jail wall. Here is the part that feels almost too fitting to be true. What caught her was her own fame. A lawman in New Mexico recognized her face from the magazine. Her trial should have been simple. She confessed to the robbery in open court. But then she told the jury she had only done it to reach her dying mother, stood up, and declared she would not consent to be tried under laws her sex had no voice in making. And the all-male jury acquitted a woman who had just admitted the crime. The judge was so furious he called them a disgrace, impaneled a new jury on a fresh charge, the theft of the driver's $10 revolver, and finally got his conviction. 5 years in Yuma Territorial Prison, where Pearl served as the only woman inside the walls, while her partner got 30 years for the same robbery. And the story still had one twist left. In 1902, the governor suddenly pardoned her, years early, and the reason whispered behind it was the strangest detail of all. Pearl had reportedly claimed she was pregnant, inside a prison that held no other women, which meant the list of possible fathers was a list the territory could not afford to publish. No child ever appeared. Pearl Hart walked out of Yuma, faded into an ordinary life, and lived quietly all the way to 1955, one of the last people ever to rob an American stagecoach and the only one the country fell in love with for doing it. Sally's Skull. In 1849, a horse trader in South Texas began telling people her husband was dead. Nobody thought much of it. Men died young on that frontier. But here's the strange part. No record of George Skull's death was ever found. No grave, no date, no cause. He simply stopped existing in the paperwork of Texas, and his wife carried on trading horses under his name. And if that were the only man to disappear around Sally Skull, it could be written off as sloppy frontier record-keeping. It was not the only one. To understand what kept happening to her husbands, you have to understand who she was. Born Sarah Jane Newman, in 1817, she came to Texas as a child with the very first settlers of Austin's colony, raised in a place where her family once had to be rescued from being burned alive. At 16, she married the Texas Ranger who helped rescue them, and that marriage ended with him telling a divorce court she was a scold, a termagant, and an adulterer. 11 days after the filing, she married George Skull, took the name history remembers, and within a few years started telling people he was dead. Husband number 2, gone without a trace. Then came husband number 3, and this is where the story stops looking like coincidence. John Doyle married her in 1852, and then he too disappeared. And this time the frontier told 2 different versions of how. In the first, Doyle ambushed his own wife and missed, and she did not miss back. In the second, he tried to wake her from a hungover sleep by pouring a pitcher of cold water over her head, and she came up off the bed with a pistol in her hand and shot him dead before her eyes were open. 2 stories, 1 ending, and no body in the record. Whichever version was true, the men of South Texas drew the same conclusion. Husband number 4 found out what happened when a man raised his hand to her instead. She divorced him for beating her and moved on, and the fact that he survived the marriage almost reads as the exception. By then, the question was no longer what happened to her husbands. It was what this woman actually was. A German traveler passing through in the 1850s wrote home about her as if describing a legend already formed, a North American Amazon, a perfect female desperado who handled a revolver and Bowie knife like the most reckless and skillful man, and who had shot several men at the dances she attended armed. She ran horses along the Mexican border with 2 cap-and-ball revolvers on her belt, and a black snake whip she could use to pick flowers off a bush, or to lay its mark across a man's shoulders. Legend credits her with dozens of killings, most of them competitors in the horse trade. What the record can actually prove is thinner and somehow worse. A Texas Ranger colonel personally watched her shoot a man down and called it justified, and she was never once imprisoned for murder. When the Civil War came, she got rich from it, running Confederate cotton to Mexico where it sold for gold, and riding home with that gold on her. May 1866 was the last time Sally Skull ever appears in an official record, a Goliad County jury acquitting her of perjury. After that, nothing. And the story of what happened next is the reason her name survives. She had taken a 5th husband by then, a man half her age the old-timers called Horse Trough, and one day the 2 of them rode out of town together. Only Horse Trough came back. He said she had simply disappeared. A woman who spent 50 years on the most violent frontier in America does not simply disappear, and the theories started immediately. The one that stuck was the gold that the young husband murdered on the road for the Cotton Road fortune she carried. Years later, a man named McDowell claimed he had found a boot sticking up from a shallow grave in the brush country between the Nueces and the Rio Grande, and under it, her body. It was never proven. Nothing about her ending ever was. The woman who made 2 husbands vanish without a record ended as the exact same kind of mystery she had spent her life creating, and even the ground would not hold her story, because her historical markers kept disappearing from the roadside too. Stolen 4 times until the county gave up and bolted one to the courthouse lawn. Donna Boon. In 2007, a man from Batavia, New York, boarded a flight to California. His airfare had been paid for him, and there was a $1,000 fee waiting for him when the job was done. The job was simple. Fly to Monterey, collect a load of methamphetamine from the president of the Monterey Hells Angels, and carry it back across the country to western New York. Before the year was out, he made the trip twice, moving as much as 1.5 kilos of meth. And the people who sent him, who bought his tickets and paid his fee, were a married couple, the vice president of the Rochester Hells Angels and his wife. The husband was James McCauley, and he had built the pipeline 5 years earlier. In 2002, he found a source of supply in Monterey, and it was not some street corner cook. It was Richard Marr, the president of the Monterey chapter, which meant the network ran patch to patch, chapter officer to chapter, from the Pacific coast into the bars and towns of western New York. For 8 years, the meth flowed east along that line, and by the time it was over, McCauley admitted to trafficking as much as 15 kilograms of it. His wife was not standing outside the business looking in. Donna Boon moved the product herself, supplying a distributor in Genesee County who broke it down for the customers below him. And when the couriers flew west in 2007, the court record is precise about who dispatched them. McCauley and Boon sent him, paid his airfare, and paid his fee. The pipeline was not a club operation that happened to run past her kitchen. It ran through the marriage. Then came the part that showed how deep the arrangement went. In 2007, the same year the couriers were flying, the law finally reached McCauley and arrested him on racketeering charges. The network did not miss a step. From behind bars, McCauley kept control of the ring through a co-conspirator on the outside, and the meth kept moving for 3 more years until the summer of 2010. A trafficking operation is supposed to die when its leader is taken. This one had a household behind it. The end came in February 2012, when a federal indictment swept up both ends of the pipeline at once: the Rochester Hells Angels in New York and the Monterey Hells Angels in California, President Marr included. The guilty pleas landed in 2016. McCauley got 300 months, 25 years, and the judge added something unusual to the sentence: a ban on associating with the Hells Angels for 5 years after his release. Boon pleaded guilty to the meth conspiracy beside him. The court weighed her admitted share at up to 30 grams and sent her home. 3 years of probation and 12 months locked inside her own house. The Rochester file showed what that blindness misses. While every eye was on the vice president, his wife was paying couriers to fly to California, and the meth was coming home to their address. Tina Picchi and Lafy Owen, the Hells Angels household. In June 2019, on the highway between Modesto and Redding, California, police pulled over a 51-year-old woman on a delivery run. In her car was a cup of soda, and inside the soda, wrapped in a plastic glove, were 4 ounces of methamphetamine. The woman was Tina Picchi, and her husband, Randy Picchi, was the president of the Modesto Hells Angels. The next day, 7 search warrants came down across Stanislaus County, one of them on the Hells Angels clubhouse, and the Picchis were arrested together. The federal complaint spelled out how prosecutors said it worked. Randy Picchi ran the drug conspiracy and sent his wife to make the deliveries to regular customers in Ceres and north to Redding, the run where the highway patrol found the soda cup. A club prospect brought in to help was caught with nearly 500 grams. The president gave the orders. The president's wife carried the product. 3 more chapter officers were indicted within months, the vice president and the secretary among them. None of it was new. 40 years earlier, the same arrangement ran in the same state, in the household of the most important meth cook the Hells Angels ever produced. Kenneth Owen, the club called him K.O., was an Oakland Hells Angel of more than 20 years whose product was legendary. And when a wired informant bought a pound from him in 1987, the lab tested it at 100% pure. When agents raided the Owen home on Golf Links Road, they carried out 21 pounds of methamphetamine, $1 million in cash, and more than 200 gold and silver coins. That was the house Lafy Owen kept. But her own file has a sharper entry than the drugs. In March 1981, an Oakland Hells Angel named Sergey Walton escaped from the San Francisco County Jail, and it took the jail 4 days to notice he was gone. The manhunt ran 2 months, when federal agents and U.S. Marshals finally cornered Walton in a cabin at Ben Lomond, deep in the Santa Cruz Mountains. He had 2 machine guns, ammunition, and 2 women with him. One of them was Lafy Owen. She was charged with harboring a fugitive. the wife of one senior Hell's Angel caught hiding another from the U.S. Marshals with automatic weapons in the room. Belle Starr. On the afternoon of February 3, 1889, a woman rode away from a neighbor's Sunday gathering in Indian Territory, still eating a piece of cornbread as she went out the door. She turned her horse onto the river lane toward home, and somewhere along that lane, a shotgun was waiting for her. The blast blew her out of the saddle, and whoever held the gun walked up to where she lay and fired again, into her back, her neck, her shoulder, and her face. Her horse galloped home without her. She died 2 days before her 41st birthday, and here is the thing that keeps this story alive more than a century later. Nobody was ever convicted of killing Belle Starr, and the closer you look at the suspects, the darker the question gets. Because the question is not who wanted her dead, it is who didn't. Belle Starr was born Myra Maybelle Shirley in 1848, the educated daughter of a prosperous Missouri family, raised in a female academy. That respectable life burned down in the Civil War, and the people who filled it afterward were the most dangerous in the country. Cole Younger, Frank, and Jesse James. The whole James Younger gang moving through her world. She married one outlaw who was shot dead, then married a Cherokee outlaw named Sam Starr, and settled at a bend of the Canadian River, where her ranch became a refuge for fugitives and a way station for stolen stock. The dime novels would later crown her the Bandit Queen, the female Jesse James, and invent a career of robberies for her. The actual record is stranger. One conviction for stealing 2 horses in the Fort Smith courtroom of Isaac Parker, the hanging judge who sent 88 people to the gallows, and even he went inexplicably soft on her, months instead of years. Charged with horse theft again in 1886, she produced a witness and walked. The law could never quite hold her. Someone with a shotgun decided not to wait for the law. So who held it? The man everyone pointed to first was Edgar Watson. He was a tenant farmer renting a field on her land, and Belle had discovered something about him. He was a fugitive, wanted for murder back in Florida, and she had turned him off her property holding that secret over his head. He was at the neighbor's gathering the day she died, and he left it shortly after she arrived. The lane where the shotgun waited ran within a few hundred yards of his farm. Motive, opportunity, and a murder in his past. It looked finished. Watson was arrested, tried for her killing, and the case seemed all but closed. Except the evidence was circumstantial, every piece of it, and Watson was acquitted. And it would be easy to say the court simply failed, that the right man walked and left it there. Had Watson been the only person on that road with a reason? He was not. Belle had just taken a new husband, Jim July, 14 years her junior, and the marriage was already strained. Some in the territory whispered his name, others whispered something worse, because the 2 people closest to her had their own wounds. Her daughter's life had collided with her mother's choices, and her son Eddie carried the darkest motive of all. Belle had reportedly horsewhipped him, her own son, for mistreating her favorite horse. And the humiliation of that beating was fresh when the shotgun fired. A husband, a daughter, a son, and a fugitive. 4 people around one woman, every one of them carrying a reason, and a killing carried out at close range by someone who knew exactly which road she would ride home on. No one ever answered for it. They buried her on her ranch in black velvet with her hand closed around her favorite revolver, and even that was stolen from her grave. The same year, a New York publisher printed the wildly invented dime novel that swallowed the real woman whole, and the myth has been standing over the unsolved grave ever since. The Bandit Queen's true story ended the way the best mysteries of the Outlaw West all end, with everyone certain and nothing proven. Cheryl Christie. The Ventura chapter of the Hells Angels was supposed to be the respectable one. Its president, George Christie, had run it for decades as the acceptable face of the club, the negotiator, the man who talked to police and reporters instead of fighting them. So respectable that in 1984, the city let him carry the Olympic torch through its streets. But every chapter, even a polished one, runs on money. And money has to be counted, recorded, and hidden. In Ventura, the person keeping the books for the Hells Angels was the president's wife. Her name was Cheryl Christie, and in May 1998, early in what would become a 4-year investigation, sheriff's deputies arrested her on suspicion of possessing drugs for sale. On the same day, her estranged husband was arrested on suspicion of narcotics possession. The raids that began that year started small, with a question about whether Christie had paid taxes on the employees at his tattoo parlor. They ended somewhere much bigger. By the time the grand jury finished, investigators had assembled tens of thousands of pages of evidence. Undercover agents had bought drugs 25 times from Hells Angels and their associates, and the picture prosecutors laid out was ugly, even by the standards of the club. They alleged a drug network that used young operatives, teenagers the investigators called HA Cub Scouts, to sell pills to kids coming out of 4 middle and high school campuses in Ventura and Ojai. Valium at $1 a pill and Vicodin at $3. When the indictments came down in 2001, they did not just take the president, they took the family. George Christie faced 23 charges carrying up to 20 years, accused of running a criminal gang, carrying a gun during crimes, evading taxes, and hiding money in secret bank accounts. His son, the chapter's vice president, was indicted. His daughter, a Ventura attorney who represented Hells Angels in court, was indicted, and his ex-wife Cheryl, the bookkeeper, had been swept up with them, the woman whose ledgers sat where the club's public image ended and its money began. Altogether, the Christies faced nearly 4 dozen criminal charges, a first family of the Hells Angels dismantled by a single case. The outcomes were smaller than the accusations. George Christie ultimately pleaded guilty to conspiring to sell prescription drugs and no contest to filing a false tax return, and served a year. Cheryl was released, her case resolving quietly while the headlines followed her husband. But her place in the story is the point of it. For decades, the Ventura Hells Angels sold the world an image of law-abiding brotherhood. And when investigators finally pulled the chapter apart, they found what they find almost every time. The patch was on the man. The books were with his wife, Kate May Barker. At dawn on January 16, 1935, more than a dozen FBI agents surrounded a 2-story cottage on the shore of Lake Weir, Florida, and called for the people inside to surrender. The answer was machine gun fire from a second-floor window. For the next 4 hours, one of the longest gun battles in the history of the FBI tore the house apart, 2,000 rounds punching through the walls while local residents spread out picnics to watch. When the guns inside finally went quiet, the agents sent the estate's handyman wearing a bulletproof vest to see who was left. He found 2 bodies in a front bedroom. One was Fred Barker, a kidnapper and killer, riddled with bullets. The other was his mother. She was 61 years old, dead from a single wound, and according to the FBI, a Tommy gun was lying in her hands. And that raises the question, who exactly had the FBI just killed? The government answered immediately, and its answer made her immortal. J. Edgar Hoover told the world that Ma Barker was the most vicious, dangerous, and resourceful criminal brain of the last decade, the matriarch who had masterminded her son's rampage across the Midwest. The Barker-Karpus gang's robberies and kidnappings that hauled in more money than Dillinger and Bonnie and Clyde combined. The story ran in every newspaper, hardened into books and films, and turned a dead grandmother in a Florida cottage into one of the most famous criminals in American history. Case closed, it seemed. The FBI had killed a mastermind, except the men who actually rode with the gang said the mastermind never existed. Alvin Karpus, the gang's co-leader and its real planner, wrote flatly that it was no insult to her memory to say she did not have the know-how to direct a robbery, that she knew her sons were criminals, but her part in their careers was limited. Another gangster who knew her put it in 5 words: she couldn't plan breakfast. And once you hear that, the second theory snaps into focus, and it is uglier than the first. Hoover's agents had just poured 2,000 rounds into a house, and killed a 61-year-old woman, and the country was going to ask why. The criminal brain of the decade was invented after she was dead, because the FBI needed her to deserve it. It would be easy to settle there. An innocent mother, a manufactured legend, and call it the truth. Had the facts of her life cooperated? They do not quite. Kate Barker raised 4 sons in Ozark poverty, and all 4 went into crime. And when her eldest shot a police officer point blank in 1927 and then killed himself, her husband walked out and left her alone with the family the law already knew by name. When Fred came out of prison and built the gang with Karpus, Kate did not stay home. She traveled with them through the entire rampage, hideout to hideout, and she was not luggage. She was covered. A sweet old mother renting a house made any hideout look innocent. And at Lake Weir, she was living under a false name, Mrs. Blackburn, a retired lady enjoying the Florida sun while her son's Tommy guns sat in the bedroom. The gang was finally undone by its own paper. A map of Florida with Lake Weir circled found when her son Doc was arrested, and an intercepted letter mentioning a famous local alligator called Old Joe that led agents straight to the right lake. The woman inside the cottage knew exactly who she was hiding with. And when the agents surrounded the house, somebody up there chose 4 hours of war over walking out the front door. Habiba Kajan. In December 2019, Ontario provincial police officers raided a house on Commissioners Road in London, Ontario. It was one of dozens of raids happening at once across the province, the end of a 2-year investigation called Project Hobart that swept up 28 people on 228 charges. When the police laid out what they had seized, it looked like the treasury of a small nation. 9 residential properties, 18 vehicles, 21 firearms, $1.7 million in cash, another $1.2 million sitting in accounts, and hundreds of thousands more in gold and silver bars and coins, $40 million in assets before it was over. And the operation behind it, police alleged, was the biggest illegal gambling ring in Canadian history, a network of password-protected online sports books that had pulled in $131 million, run by the Hells Angels in partnership with a mafia crime family. The house on Commissioners Road belonged to a woman named Habiba Kajan. She was 43, and she was charged with more counts than almost anyone else in the sweep: 10 firearms offenses, 3 bookmaking offenses, committing an offense for a criminal organization, and possessing property obtained by crime. And on the gun charges, the court documents showed she was not charged alone. She was charged jointly with Robert Barletta, a founding member of the London chapter of the Hells Angels, a former strip club owner, and one of the alleged leaders of the entire gambling empire. Among the weapons in those joint charges was a loaded handgun with the serial number ground off. Barletta was a man the law had been failing to hold for years. He had been tied to an earlier Hells Angels sportsbook run out of Costa Rica, and when that ring was broken in 2013 and others went to prison, the charges against him were dropped, earning him a nickname in the press, the Teflon Biker. The world around him was considerably less safe than his court record. While he was out on bail on the Hobart charges, someone tried to kill him in downtown Toronto. His family's vacation home had already burned to the ground in a fire investigators ruled deliberately set. And a Hells Angel who police said worked inside the same gambling operation was shot dead outside a Mississauga gym in a targeted hit. The money was enormous, and the violence swirling around it was real. Then the case died. The prosecutions dragged on so long that the courts ruled the delays unreasonable, and one by one, the charges collapsed. Every count against the alleged ringleaders was stayed or withdrawn, including every charge against Habiba Kajan, and the biggest gambling bust in Canadian history ended with nothing worse than a few fines and peace bonds for minor players. Nothing against her was ever proven. What the record shows is the shape of the thing: a woman charged side by side with a founding Hells Angel over an alleged empire worth 9 figures, holding her ground through the arsons, the shootings, and the collapse of the biggest case Ontario ever built, and walking out the other side free. Kanyarat Wechapitak. In September 2018, in a provincial courtroom in Thailand. A 40-year-old Thai woman stood beside her Australian husband and listened to a judge sentence them both to death. Her name was Kanyarat Wechapitak. His name was Luke Cook, and he was a former member of the Hells Angels. The case that put them there involved half a ton of crystal methamphetamine, a yacht, a Chinese supplier on the open sea, and $300 million worth of drugs at the bottom of the Gulf of Thailand. To the tourists of Pattaya, Cook and Kanyarat were a power couple. They ran a bar and restaurant and the small hotel attached to it, fixtures of the city's expat strip, a businessman and his wife. What Thai police described was something else. In 2015, a high-ranking Australian Hells Angel named Wayne Schneider, a fugitive regarded at the time as the biggest importer of narcotics into Australia, handed Cook $15 million to buy and store a shipment of drugs bound for Australia. A company was set up, and it bought a yacht called the Jomandi, which was transferred into the names of Cook and Kanyarat. In June 2015, according to police, the yacht slipped out of a Pattaya marina, met a Chinese vessel in international waters, and took aboard 500 kilograms of crystal meth. Then a law enforcement patrol boat appeared, and the shipment went over the side into the sea. 4 sacks of it, about 50 kilos, later washed up on a beach in Rayong province, which is how the plot surfaced at all. What followed showed exactly what kind of world the couple was living in. Schneider wanted his $15 million back, and Schneider did not get it. In November 2015, he was murdered by members of his own gang, kidnapped and beaten to death. His naked body found in a shallow grave beside a road in Pattaya. Cook was later convicted of helping the killer try to flee across the border into Cambodia and received a suspended sentence for it. The man who had bankrolled the meth was in the ground, and the couple who had held the yacht sailed on for 2 more years until December 2017, when they walked through Bangkok's Suvarnabhumi airport on their way to a holiday in Australia, and the police were waiting. The trial ended with both of them condemned to death, their assets seized, and Kanyarat facing execution over a shipment of drugs that had never even reached land. She went to prison under a death sentence, the wife of a Hells Angel who had come as close to the bottom of the outlaw world's price as any woman in this story. Her husband protested from his cell, posting from prison that he asked no one to feel sorry for him, only to consider the facts. Then the story turned one last time. The couple appealed, year after year, up through the Thai courts, and on September 14, 2021, the Supreme Court of Thailand threw the case out, dismissing all charges. After 3 years in the shadow of an execution, Kanyarat Wechapitak walked free, her conviction erased at the highest level, and her husband was deported home to Australia. Jeanne de Clisson. In the mid-1300s, French sailors began coming home with the same story. Out of the fog came ships that flew no flag, hulls painted black with pitch, sails dyed the color of blood. The men aboard slaughtered the crews and burned the cargoes, and they always left 1 or 2 sailors alive. So someone would carry the story back to the King of France. The survivors whispered the same name, the Lioness of Brittany. The lioness had been a noblewoman. Jeanne de Clisson was born in 1300 into a wealthy French family, married at 12, widowed in her 20s, and married again to the man history remembers her for, Olivier de Clisson, a powerful lord of Brittany. For years, Olivier fought on France's side in the war over Brittany's crown. Then the king's ally, Charles de Blois, turned on him, whispering that Olivier meant to defect to the English. In 1343, he was lured onto French territory, arrested, and put through a trial with one possible verdict. On August 2nd, he was beheaded in a Paris marketplace. Then the crown did what it reserved for the lowest criminals. His body was hung on the public gibbet, and his head was shipped to Nantes and mounted on a lance above the city gate. What the king did next tells you he never imagined the widow. Jeanne rode to Nantes with her 2 young sons, stood them beneath the gate, and made them look up at their father's rotting head, so they would never forgive it either. Then she went to war with France. She sold her lands and everything she owned, raised a force of loyal men, and struck French garrisons across Brittany. And when the land grew too dangerous, she took what money was left and bought 3 warships. She painted them black, dyed the sails red, and named her flagship My Revenge. For 13 years, the Black Fleet hunted French shipping from the Bay of Biscay to the English Channel, falling on the vessels of the king and his nobles, killing the crews, and sparing just enough men to keep the King of France informed of who was doing it. Every account carried the same detail. When a French aristocrat was found aboard a captured ship, the lioness beheaded him herself with an axe, one nobleman at a time. The same death the crown had given her husband, repaid at sea for over a decade. She allied with England, ran supplies to English soldiers in France, and was named an English ally in a truce between the 2 kingdoms. When Philip VI, the king who signed her husband's death, died in 1350, she did not stop. The revenge had outgrown him. Then came the strangest part. She won. No French fleet ever caught he. After 13 years, she decided the revenge was finished, retired from the sea, married an English officer, and settled into a castle on the Brittany coast, where she died peacefully in 1359, having outlived her husband's killers and half the men who ever hunted her. The fake old ladies. Every woman so far broke the rules of the outlaw world. These women used them. In the biker world, a member's woman is his old lady, sometimes stamped property of on her vest. She is a decoration, assumed to see nothing and matter to no one. Then the federal government turned that assumption into a weapon. When the ATF launched its infiltration of the Mongols, the most violent motorcycle club in Southern California, it put 4 undercover agents inside, men who spent 3 years becoming fully patched members, surviving background checks, sitting in the meetings, riding with killers. But a man who came to every party alone, year after year, would eventually make someone wonder. In that world, a serious man has a woman. So alongside the 4 male agents, the ATF sent in 4 women, agents who took the role of the bikers' girlfriends and lived it. They went to the parties, the runs, and the clubhouses of a gang whose members earned patches for murder. They played the part of property in rooms full of men who treated women as exactly that, knowing the men beside them earned rank through violence. Same suspicion, same scrutiny, same drunken nights where one wrong word ends everything, and none of them was ever exposed. When the operation came down in October 2008, 61 Mongols were arrested in a single morning across 6 states, the club's former national president among them. The most devastating takedown ever run against a motorcycle club to that point. The old ladies had been watching everything. And in the most legendary undercover case in biker history, a fake old lady stood at the center of it. When ATF agent Jay Dobbins spent 2 years burrowing into the Hells Angels, the first cop ever to reach the edge of a full patch, a young agent named Jenna McGuire worked beside him as his girlfriend, his cover, and his backup. It was her first undercover assignment. Her test came on the worst day of the operation. Dobbins was summoned to the Mesa clubhouse, where 25 Hells Angels waited with their guns drawn, convinced there was a cop in the room, and one of them leaned in and asked whether he could outdraw a trigger squeeze. McGuire stood beside him, one woman in a room full of armed men deciding whether to kill. She told Dobbins quietly that if he was going down that night, she was going down with him. The Angels never suspected her. They were looking for the cop among the men. Griselda Blanco. Every deadly thing ever done on a motorcycle traces back, one way or another, to a short, heavy-set Colombian woman. Before the cartels, before the sicarios, someone had to think of it first. The idea that 2 men on a bike could ride up to a target, fire, and vanish into traffic before anyone understood what had happened. The person credited with inventing the motorcycle assassin was not a man. She was Griselda Blanco, and the method she created became the signature of the Medellin cartel, the standard execution of the drug war, and, in the end, the way she died. She came out of the slums of Medellin, and her criminal life started before she was a teenager. At 11, by the accounts of those who knew her, she kidnapped a boy from a wealthy neighborhood, and when his family refused to pay, she shot him. By her 20s, she was building something nobody had built before, a pipeline of cocaine from Colombia into the United States, years before Pablo Escobar's name meant anything. She hired couriers to walk through airports with cocaine sewn into false bottom suitcases, shoes, and underwear. And as the business grew, the loads moved to speedboats. At its height, her organization pushed 1.5 tons of cocaine into American cities a month and earned $80 million doing it. And she stood at the top, a woman commanding an empire in the most violent business on earth. Then she moved to Miami, and Miami became a war zone. Blanco wanted the market, and she took it by killing everyone in her path, over debts, over territory, over insults, over suspicion. In 1979, her gunman executed a rival in broad daylight inside the Dadeland Mall, and the wave of killing that followed became the Cocaine Cowboy Wars, a stretch when Blanco was blamed for most of the murders in South Florida, and the morgue rented a refrigerated van for the overflow of bodies. Her hitmen wrote her invention into history, and her enemies learned that nothing protected them. Not bodyguards, not daylight, not witnesses. Estimates of the murders she ordered run from 40 to well past 200, with Colombian officials suspecting another 250 at home. In her own house, she was just as lethal. They called her the Black Widow because her husbands kept dying. One murdered after a business dispute, one shot in the head by Griselda herself in an argument over money. The third killed on her orders after he kidnapped their youngest son, a boy she had named Michael Corleone. A line has followed her ever since, attributed to Pablo Escobar. The only man he was ever afraid of, he said, was a woman named Griselda Blanco. The law got her in 1985, a DEA agent climbing the stairs of a California house to find the most feared woman in the hemisphere sitting on a bed. She served nearly 2 decades for trafficking, and for 3 murders she pleaded to. One of them, a 2-year-old boy struck by bullets meant for his father, and she escaped the death penalty only because the star witness against her destroyed his own credibility. In 2004, she was deported to Colombia, an aging woman who settled quietly in Medellin and, by some accounts, found religion. Then, on September 3rd, 2012, Griselda Blanco, 69 years old, walked out of a butcher shop in Medellin with her daughter-in-law. A motorcycle came down the street. The man on it shot her twice in the head and rode away. The mother of the motorcycle assassination died by a motorcycle assassination, killed by her own invention, the debt of 200 murders collected by the method she had given the world. The outlaw world always told the same lie, that its women were decoration, standing at the edge of the frame while the men did the real work. Every woman in this video proved it wrong. But there is one power even the most ruthless of them learn to fear, the cartels that supply the drugs the whole outlaw world runs on. The Hells Angels thought they were partners with that power. They were wrong. Click the next video to see what happens when the most feared biker club on earth crosses the real force behind the drug trade.